Welcome to this Java FX tutorial where we will be building a basketball scorekeeper application to keep track of two team scores during a game. Notice that we are able to change a team's name up here and the other team's name, and they are kept separately, and we can change the scores by 1, 2, and 3 increments for both teams, and they are also kept separately. And we can reset each team's score and keep adding as we please. Also notice that we have added styling and certain things like drop shadows, coloring, various spacing, and more. And in this video I will show you how to bring all of that together, including the front end and back end, in order to make a nice application. Let's get started in IntelliJ by creating a new project and navigating to JavaFX. If your JavaFX tab does not look like this, then you'll want to upgrade your IntelliJ version to the latest version. It should have all of these different options. So to get started, let's go ahead and name our project whatever we want, but for this application I'm going to do a basketball application. And I'm going to change my location to a different location that I've specified. Totally optional. Language Java, build system Maven. You will not need to worry about the build system right now, but basically know that it's used to package a jar file in order for other people to install your application later. Test framework, we don't need to worry about this for our purposes right now. And for the group, I'm going to do me.p307408. That's what I usually use. This usually is me.whatever your name is. It can be it's really it's like a domain name. It can be anything you want. For the artifact, I'm going to make this lowercase. That's just standard convention, but it doesn't matter really. And for the SDK, anything really above 11 will work, but for these purposes I'm going to use 17. Hit next. These dependencies you don't need to worry about unless you really know what you're doing. They're just extra libraries to use. You don't have to worry about them. And I'll hit finish. Once your application is loaded, it should look a little something like this, and it should be open on the Hello application page. Now these files under the source main Java are just template files generated by IntelliJ, and they give us a good idea of how things work if we look through them. So I will go ahead and run the main class here, which is Hello application, by right-clicking and hitting run. And it should pop up a window saying hello, and I can click that. Cool. For our purposes, we're going to be sort of rerouting certain things to make them suited for our purposes. To do this, I'm going to make a few file changes by adding a directory here, and I'm going to call it controller. So I'm going to put all of our controller classes within that directory just to be organized. Now, under the resources folder in source main resources, you kind of want to mirror your directories. So I'm going to come down here to this directory, hit new directory, and I'm going to name it controller. So that creates another file under there that will basically be the same as up in the Java tree. I'm going to do that again for our CSS class, and we will worry about that later. I will now go ahead and delete the existing template classes because we're going to create our own. However, I'm not going to delete the Hello application. Now that we've done that, I'd like to go ahead and add the files that we're going to actually edit for our application. To get started, I'm going to rename this Hello application to a more professional term, and I like to use application entry, but any other name would work, like main or anything that signifies that this is where the main method is. From there, I'm going to add two classes. These will be our two controllers. I'm going to make one the application controller. This is where all of our main application windows will be and everything that's inside the logic. And from there, I will make a team controller class. This class is how each team will have their score counted and kept track of. From there, I'm going to go down to controller, under resources, and add another file. And I'll name this application.fxml. This is to mirror the application controller we have up here, and I'll do the same for team controller. So team.fxml. And we're going to be having some styling that we're doing to our team controller. So I'm going to add a team.css class down here. Cool. Time for the fun stuff. Let's get started making our application. Head over to application.fxml. This is a file similar to the HTML files you'll see in a website. And I'm going to open that with Scene Builder. To do this, I will right-click application.fxml and hit open in Scene Builder. And we should have a screen like this. To get started, I'm going to add an anchor pane. Typically when you have an application, you'll want an anchor pane. The name kind of suggests that it is the bottom of the application. And with this anchor pane, I'm going to go to Layout and change the preferred width to 800 and preferred height to 600. I will go ahead and hit save, and we will come back to this later. We can see that after we hit save, Scene Builder automatically imported a bunch of code in here, and similar to HTML, we have the angle brackets representing each type of element, and we have certain attributes that are specified within. Let's begin designing the team.fmx file. So I'll go over to team.fxml and I'll hit open in Scene Builder. Once again, it should look empty like this, and let's start designing. I'm going to get started by adding an anchor pane. And I'll change the preferred height to 600 and the preferred width to 400, which is half of our application fxml. Now I will add a VBox. A VBox is another built-in element that is used to kind of have a layout, and it's used in accordance with horizontal boxes, which I will show in a second. For now, I'm going to do fit to parent on the VBox, and that's good. Then I'm going to add 4 HBoxes, which kind of fit in nicely with the VBox. I can just drag and drop those from the side. And that is good. Within each of those, for the top one, I'm going to add a text field. And for the second, I'm going to add a label. For the third, I'm going to add 3 buttons. And for the fourth, another button. Nice. Let's get styling. First off, with all of the HBoxes selected, I am going to go into their properties setting, and I'll hit node orientation, and I'll hit alignment and hit center. This will center everything's content. To make everything look nice and even, I'm going to go ahead and change the height of the horizontal boxes. Under layout, you'll see preferred width and preferred height. For 3 of the 4 boxes, we're going to have 100. And for the last one, the one with the label, we will have a height of 300. This makes everything nice and evenly spaced. I'm now going to edit the text in each of our labels to make sure we know what each label is doing. To get started, I'm going to go up here and type in name. And down here, I'll type in 0 because that's where our score is. And for each button, I'm going to do +1, +2, and +3. Okay, and for the bottom button, it's our reset button. Cool. Now before I do any more editing with spacing and aligning things, I'm going to go ahead and add our style sheet. To do this, I'll navigate to my anchor pane element, and I'll go down under properties to style sheets. I'll hit plus, and I'll navigate to the CSS file we made earlier. If it doesn't automatically pull up for you like this, you will likely be under the controller folder. To get out of that, navigate up to Basketball Application and go under CSS and select team.css. Okay, now it's added. Now I will navigate to team.css and it should be blank. Okay. Just like HTML, we need to add class selectors to each of our elements. I will go back to Scene Builder and select each of our elements and add a class name. For the name box, I will add name text input as our class name. I'll go down to the label and do the same, but I will call this score label. And for these three buttons, I'll select all of them and add a style class of score button. And for the bottom reset button, I will do reset button. All right, for the name, I will select it by doing dot name text label. I think that's correct. Let's see. No, name text input. And I will set its background color to gray. Notice that I have to use -fx- in front of background color. This is because JavaFX, when using CSS, does not use the exact same style names as CSS normally does. A full detailed documentation can be found online of this, but I won't go over that in this video. And if I hit save in this team.css file, it should automatically update within my scene builder. And it did. I will now add the same styles that I want to add for each element. So for score label, I'll do a background FX color of a special color, 333. That's like a dark gray. Okay. And for the buttons, I will do a background color of orange. And for the reset button, I'm going to do gray again. So I'll select this up here, and then here, and change the class to reset button. All right. And out of personal preference, I will add a drop shadow class inside of my CSS file just to make things pop out even more. And that will be called drop shadow. Now under each element here, I'm going to add another class called drop shadow. And notice when I go to add a class here, it will list the name of each class we have inside our CSS file. So I'll hit select drop shadow, and I'll do the same for all of them. Nice. It may be hard to notice, but there is a tiny drop shadow, which will look even better when the atoms are a bit bigger. Okay, everything's nicely styled. And before I move on to spacing, I will make one more change to the anchor pane by adding a style class named anchor. And I'll head over to my CSS file over here. I'll go on top, .anchor, fx background color, and I'll do light gray. And I'll save that. And that looks a lot better. Let's move on to some spacing. First, I'm going to select the name, and I'll do a little bit of dragging so that under the layout section on the right side, it will automatically change to using preferred width and height. Now I'll edit the preferred width to 225, and I'll make the height about 75. Okay. And under properties, I'm going to center the text in the very center, and I will make the font about 27. Yeah, that looks good. Nice. Now for the score label, I will go over to layout, and I'm going to drag it again just to make it use preferred width instead of computed size. And I'll change the height to 150 and width to 150 as well. And I'll go up to properties, and I'm going to make the font, well, let's do a white. And I'll make the size 75. And we'll go ahead and center the content in the middle just like the button. All right, now for each button, I'm going to select all of them and set the preferred width to 75. Now, once again, it won't let me do this unless I manually resize each of them. So I'll do that, and I'll go select them all. And I'll change the preferred width to 75 and preferred height to 75 as well, just to make them nice and square. From there, I will go and change the font size to 24. And the text is already centered, so I'm not going to worry about that. Now, there is one thing I don't really like about them right now. They're a bit close together. So back under layout, we can add some margin. And if you don't remember from CSS, margin is spacing between other elements, and it will automatically make the space more the more pixels you add. So on the right side of each element, I'm going to have a 10 pixel gap, and on the left side, I will do the same. Nice, those look good and spaced out. Now for the reset button, I'm going to drag it once again to get the preferred width set in. And I'll set that to 175, and we'll make that by 65. Now back up to properties. I will set the font size to 25. And that looks good. And once again, there's one more change I'd like to make to the styling. And I'm going to make another class in the CSS file, and I'll call that rounded edge, rounded border. And for the effect, I will give it a background radius of 5 pixels. Now for all the labels and buttons, I will add the rounded border class to make them all look the same and have the same rounded border look. So add that for name. All right, that looks very nice. There's one last thing we need to do before going to Java and doing our backend logic, and that is adding fx IDs to each element, allowing us to grab the element in Java and make changes to it. Now these elements I will be making similar to their class names for their Java fx IDs. And for the name label, I will do name text input. For the score label, I will do score label. And for each button, instead of doing score button, I'll do one button for the one button, and two button, and three button. And finally for the reset button, reset button. Okay, it's now time to add our team controller inside Java. So I will navigate to the team controller class, and we want to make this a custom component that we can use inside of our application controller. To do this, I will have it extend the anchor pane class. And the reason we are extending anchor pane is because the bottom of our team.fxml uses anchor pane. What this means is that we can have an anchor pane and use it inside of our application.fxml in order to have multiple team controllers. Now the first order of business is adding all of our selected elements that we added fx IDs to. In order to add them, we can either type them out manually by adding the fxml annotation and typing out each label, or we can just go over to Scene Builder and up in View, we can hit Show Samples Controller Skeleton. This will provide a sample class with a bunch of fields for each of our elements. So I'm just going to copy and paste those and close that, go back to our Java and paste all of those in. Now notice that all of these will appear as red because we haven't imported them. So to do this, the easiest way is to kind of backspace once and hit tab on the suggestion, and do that for every element. Before going to the next part, let's observe our team.fxml file. Notice that under anchor pane we have all of our children like VBox, HBox, and text field. Every element in JavaFX is built off a node. If you go up in the component hierarchy, you will see node at the very top, and there are certain elements that extend it and other elements that extend those. Now what we're doing here is adding our custom component that extends an anchor pane, so it is a node and we can use it in JavaFX. Now every time we use a component in our tree, it will basically call the constructor of that class. So in VBox, every time we use it, it'll call the public VBox constructor. Now, under team controller, we need to do the same. So public team controller, and we're adding a constructor there. Now, to actually add the custom component, we must load the component when the constructor is called inside of JavaFX. So to do that, I will import the fxml loader class, and I'll set it to new fxml loader. And we must grab the fxml file from the file tree. To do this, we use the getClass method, and we use a method getResource, and we will do team.fxml. Now, what I explained earlier about mirroring your file directories, it is very important here so that the program will automatically know to go to the resources folder and go to the same directory and grab that file. If you don't do this, you could run into problems. With that, let's set the controller to this. This means that whatever class we set the controller to will have all of our fields here and will allow us to edit each element inside of our custom component. Now we must load our custom component. We can do this by using the loader and load. Notice that this throws an IO exception. We must use a try catch statement in order to catch that, just to be safe. So I'll catch IO exception E and e.print stack trace. Nice. Now we must catch the return object of the load method, so I'll do node n equals loader.load. Now we could do anchor pane, because this class is an anchor pane. That would work. However, we don't need to because of abstraction. It allows us to use the same methods that Node has without any trouble. And finally, we must add the component to the children list of this node. And by that, we can use this.getChildren.add n. This basically will add it to the window of the scene and allow us to be able to see the node inside of the application. Okay, time for the fun stuff. Let's add some listeners to our buttons. So if we go back to our scene builder and we take a look at all of our different labels and buttons, we want each of these to have a certain function. To do this, we must listen to events within our code. And I'm going to go back to IntelliJ and I'll make a method called setListeners. Inside of here, we want to add a special functionality to each of our buttons and labels. Now we want to keep track of the score, so I'm going to add up on top of the constructor a private integer, let's call it score, and that'll be 0. I will additionally make a method called render, which will set the score label text to the value of our score. Now what I'm doing here is grabbing the score label, which is a label, and I'm using the setText method, which will update the text, and I'm setting that to the string value of our score. Now in order to call this method, we need to do it every time a button is clicked. Now if I go back to my setListeners method, I can do one button set on mouse clicked, and notice that it takes a event handler interface as its parameter. Let's inspect this interface. If we control click on set on mouse clicked and control click on the event handler that it takes, we see that is a functional interface, which has one method. This means that we can use a lambda on it. So if we go back to our team controller class, we can specify that it is an event being passed in and use our lambda arrow, and I'll put curly brackets in order to have multiple lines in our code. Now because this is the one button, we want to make our score plus equal 1. And every time it's clicked, we just want to re-render it. Now let's copy this code and paste it 4 times. And we'll name this 2 button here, 3 button here, and this one will be reset button. And we'll set the score to 0 for the reset. And for the 2 button, we'll make it +2, and the 3 button +3. And down here, it should be equal 0, not plus equal 0. And once we're done with that, I will go to the constructor again and do setListeners to call that method. And there's one more thing I forgot to do up in the top of the method, which is called the super keyword, in order to call the anchor pane constructor. Now that we've finished the team controller class, we can go up and add the team controller in Scene Builder. To do this, we must first package our application as a jar using artifacts within IntelliJ. And for that, we have to go up to File, Project Structure, and we'll see on the left side here we have a few options. We want to go under Artifacts. Now hit plus. On jar, we want to select From Modules with Dependencies. From there, we hit this folder next to main class and select our main class application entry. And that should be good. From here, all we have to do is hit this check mark and hit apply and OK. Now up in the top again, we will navigate to Build, Build Artifacts, and when the window pops up, we will select Build. Once this is done, it will generate an out folder, and within that we have a jar. Now I'm not sure if this jar will run if we execute it. However, now in Scene Builder, above all the components, there is a little gear icon, and I will click that, go to jar/fxml manager, and the third option down, add library from file system. We will click that, and this should open up where the fxml file that we have open in Scene Builder is. So we want to navigate out of that up into the main directory and go to the out folder, artifacts, and open up the jar. And boom, we have our custom team controller component, and it even shows what it looks like. So I'll go ahead and import that component. And once I'm done with that, I'll hit close. Now that we have the team controller component in here, we can look it up by its name if we ever want to find it, or we can just go to custom and drag and drop a team controller component in. And because we made the preferred size of the team controller anchor pane 400 by 300, it will fill that size inside of this anchor pane, which is 800 by 600. Now what we can do from here is drag another one in, and that should be all we have to do for our application.fxml file. I will go ahead and hit save, and it's good to go. One of the coolest parts is that back in our application.fxml file, we can navigate into it, and we can see that there are two team controller components here. One that has nothing specified within its parameters, and the other one that has a layout X property that specifies that the component should be 400 pixels to the right of the origin, which is what we see. Now if we navigate from our application file to the main file, application entry, we can see that we're still using the template variables and all of that we've set up. I'm going to go ahead and change this so that we use all of the files that we want to in order to run our application. Now in the first line, when it loads the file, helloview.fxml, we no longer have that file, but instead we want to load our application.fxml file because that's our main file. So we want to do controller/application.fxml. Now what this does, inside of our target folder, if we look on this left side here, we can open it up, and if we go to classes, we can see that there's this hierarchy, and when we have this controller folder, it contains not only the actual classes, but the fxml files in addition. So basically when we compile the source code, it will combine the Java and the resources tab into one. Now when we're in this application entry class, we are basically in the basketball application folder. So if we get a folder from the controller folder, so we go down one level, and then we do the application.fxml, we get that file. And that's why we need to use controller/. In the next line, instead of specifying the preferred width, we already have that inside of our application.fxml class. So all we have to do is fxmlloader.load. And then we should set the title to something more custom to our application. I'm going to do basketball scorekeeper. And then everything else from here should be fine. However, I'm going to add one property to the stage, set resizable false. To run it, I will use the run method on main by hitting application entry.main. And here we go. As you can see, we can enter the name and the name on here. And we can implement the score, and it increments by the correct value each time, and we can reset it. And that works for both of them as well. Now that we're done with our application, it's always important to remember that refactoring can be done to make the code cleaner. In this application, I noticed that the application controller class is empty, and we could be using this for our application.fxml. However, we don't have any functionality for it right now, so I'll go ahead and delete that class. Additionally, in team controller, in the setListeners method, we have some repeated code here. So in order to accomplish a refactored code method here, I could make a public void set button listener, take a button, and I'll take another functional interface called a supplier, and I'll take an integer supplier. And of course, it must be imported, so I'll backspace 1 and hit tab. Okay, now for each button, I will want to set mouse on clicked, and I'll use the functional interface lambda event and have double brackets for multiple lines. And the score should equal supplier.get. And I'll show how that works later. And then the render. Okay, so for each button, I will add one button dot, I will add set one button. And then the integer, we need to do an empty parameter lambda there, and we will return score plus 1. And then we'll do that again for 2 button, empty parameter score plus 2. And then again, 3, empty lambda score plus 3. And finally, reset button 0. Okay, let's run our application. I'll drag that over here. Okay, seems to implement correctly. It will reset it. All right, that works nicely.